What is up, my nerds? Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to talk about some no prep drag race technology and some of the stuff that I get asked about. First and foremost, no prep drag racing has become a huge thing in the RC world. It's like street racing for RC cars. You take a two-wheel drive, which is usually based on like a slash, a two-wheel drive short course of some sort, and they race them in the street and parking lots. And the no prep part of the name means that they don't prep the track, meaning like most RC races, if you've been around it, the track has a ton of preparation into it. Lots of traction, whether it's dirt, carpet, whatever. If there's not a lot of bite, the RC nerds kind of whine, I don't have enough traction. So no prep is quite the opposite. They don't care. They run in a dirty parking lot. At most, they blow the dust off and have at it. And a lot of people are getting into it big time. They either have a setup that they want to make it work, so they call us up and say, hey, I've got this. What settings should I use? What gearing? Or they say, I'm going to get into no prep. What should I get? So a couple topics we're going to talk about here. I got some things on the table. 4-pole motors, 2-pole motors, XR8 speed controls, XR10 speed controls, plugs, wheelie bar, battery pack choices, all that fun stuff. Let's get right into it. First and foremost, you're going to have a car of some sort. You've already got that part decided. It's probably a slash. It could be one of them custom rigs with a mid-motor or the backwards transmission. And some of the cars, like normally, the motor's in the back of the car. This is the rear. This is the front. Some of the vehicles now, they're running a flip transmission, so the motor's in the middle, and that means the motor has to go backwards. If you get one of those vehicles, it can get real tricky because not all of the speed controls have motor rotation as an option for censored mode. XR10 G2 does, XR8 SCT, XR8 the other Pro does as well. So if you're going to go that route, you need to keep that in mind that for censored setup, it has motor rotation. Beyond that, it comes down to a 4-pole motor or a 2-pole motor. 4-pole motors are the ones that are rated by kV. 2-pole motors are the ones that are rated by turns. Why? I don't know. The 4-pole motors turns are so obscure, and sometimes one type of turn can be terminated 2 different ways and get 2 different kVs. So for example, just using numbers, if this is a 1.5 turn with Y termination, it'll be 1 kV. It's a 1.5 turn with delta termination, it's another kV. What the heck does that mean? How the coils are interconnected inside of the motor. It changes the kV and the characteristics. So these are rated by kV instead of turn. Now, the turn-rated motors also have a kV, obviously, but because there's so much more tuning with end-bell timing, the kV changes a lot. So there's more adjustability from the sensor board, if you will, in the motor that makes these motors rated by turns. It's just the way it is. Why? I really don't know, if I'm honest. So what's the difference on the track? 4 poles are going to be like diesel horsepower, a little bit more torque. They're not going to like the RPM as much. 2-pole motors are going to be more like a 12-cylinder, high-revving Ferrari motor, so to speak. It's a pretty drastic comparison. Maybe 4-stroke to a 2-stroke is another way to look at it. But 4-pole motors are generally going to have a bigger shaft, so you got to keep an eye on that. Some of them do have the smaller size shafts as well, and it's a 5mm versus an 1/8 inch, but they're give or take, about the same size. The numbers of the motor, 3652, stands for the diameter, 36, and the length, 52. These are 3650s, so it's 36 by 50. If you didn't know what those numbers meant, that's what they mean. But for the most part, they're censored motors. They have adjustable timing. And for you no prep drag race guys, I'll do you a favor. Turn the end bell timing all the way down to as low as it'll go. Start there. And then you can use the timing like a pinion gear to fine tune your top speed stuff. So that's your difference in motors. Now that kind of coincides with what speed control you're going to go with. Most of the time, if you're going to run 4-pole stuff, you want XR8 speed control. It's made for 4 poles. It's a little beefier. XR10s will run them okay too. I've run XR10s on my 4-pole setups. I have a short course basher truck that my buddy has an XR10 and I think it's a 4600 kV 4-pole in it. Runs okay. I don't know that I recommend that to everybody, but it seems to work all right. Now, the big difference, though, is going to be in the tuning options. XR10 has a lot more tuning options overall. Turbo boost, all that stuff, bigger range, more adjustability than the XR8. But that being said, it doesn't need as much because it's running 4-pole motors. You can crank gear and all that stuff a little easier. So big difference in size as well. Big difference in weight, but basic functionality in the car is going to be pretty much the same, but you see there are some pretty sizable differences in these guys, obviously. But basic performance, I wouldn't say that you're going to notice a ton starting out, but later on, you're probably going to be leaning towards the XR10 stuff. The real go-fast guys that run with like timing systems and lights, most of them are on XR10s and like 5.5s or 4.5s, stuff like that. And then so you got your combo choices to think about here. So that gets that out of the way. And then the big thing is going to be battery pack and plugs. If you don't have a good battery pack and good plugs, you're kind of wasting your time. Nothing's going to hit the way it's supposed to. You're going to run into some goofy problems where it runs okay one time and then not the next time. I have battery packs that have these bullet plugs on them, right? A lot of people love these bullet plugs. I dislike bullet plugs like nobody could talk about. So I leave my bullet plugs permanently installed in the battery. I'll take the balance guy out every once in a while just for installs and whatnot to get it in and out of the car. But these guys stay in here so that they don't get dirty and worn out, because you cannot replace the tubes inside the battery. So once you wear that tube out, the battery's not very good. So you plug these things out in and out a few dozen times, you can replace the ends on the battery, no problem, but you can't replace these tubes. They get dust in them, they get dirt in them, they get filthy over time, nobody really cleans them, and you end up with, maybe the battery works okay, but that connection's not as good as it should be. So I leave my pigtails in my batteries all the time. I try not to move them, try not to pull them out, try to keep them tight so nothing gets down in there, and that way I got big gauge wire and then a plug on the end. Now, XT60 is what I started my drag racing with, and it seems to be okay for the most part. But I'm recommending XT90s for everybody for the most part. And while we're on the plug topic, let's talk about this. Here's a huge plug, and the reason I like XT style plugs is because of this cup. You can lay the wire flat on the metal and then solder on top of it so that the wire is touching more surface of the material than solder. EC style plugs, the Traxxas plugs, the Dean's plugs, the surface that you're soldering to is smaller than the wire. That's immediately a bad sign, folks. If your metal is less than your wire, that's not enough plug for what you're doing. You need to have a big plug. And the EC style plugs, or any of the tube style plugs, where this is a completed tube and you have to put the wire in there, feed the solder in, ends up making a pretty bad connection because the wire is floating inside of the solder instead of touching the material. And that's real bad because it's hard to push the wire all the way down, and then you're just if this is your piece of wire, just the edge of it or the end of it is going to be touching what is not a flat surface. This is, it's concaved in there, and the tubes are all the same way. That's just the process of them. So you end up with not a very good solder joint on a very large connector. So I like the AMAS brand XTs because they're super affordable, they're pretty beefy, they're widely available. You can get them off the internet directly from this company. AMAS is their brand. There's lots of knockoff plugs out there, so be wary of that. The battery packs you buy that have the plugs on them already, most of those are going to be knockoff plugs and made out of inferior materials. So be sure to check and keep good plugs on. I have a bag of plugs at the ready at all times because my buddies all have plug problems, and I'll solder them up some plugs and get everybody going. And then final topic for drag racing, find yourself a wheelie bar. There are lots of wheelie bar options out there. This particular one is the STRC one. I like it because it's beef, and STRC has been around since forever, making lots of options. And full disclosure, I have been friends with STRC's owners for years. We used to run parking lot races back in the day. So anytime he comes out with something cool, I hit him up and he sends me one. This is actually the original prototype of his wheelie bar that he sent me. So that's pretty cool. It's not on the car now, it's going back on. The tuning situation, what's the hot tune? So here's my pro tip for all of you. I know you waited all the way till the end for this, so here it is. Tiny pinion gears, big spur gears, and then I generally don't use boost. In XR10, I use turbo, and then you adjust how much turbo, and then you can kind of work on the turbo delay. And the other one you want to look at is the decrease rate, how quickly it takes the timing away, because that affects if you have to pedal it, so keep an eye on that. Tiny pinion gear, big spur gear, and then be real easy. Don't use any boost. You're going to want to use the turbo until you get the hang of things. And then when you do decide if you want to start trying the boost, do a little bit of research on that. Watch my video on timing, because that breaks that down in a little bit more detail than what we've gone into here. I think that covers it. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you do have some questions about this or anything else, feel free to send us an email, northamerica@hobbywing.com. Thanks a lot.